Hello, and welcome to VACI Hospital Training for Safety of Hospital Employees when caring for a detainee.
Today, we're going to be covering a few things. First, we're going to start with policy. We'll go from the intake through the discharge. We'll talk about the safety of the hospital employees and staff. We'll also talk about the safety and care of the detainees or prisoners. We're also going to discuss the confidentiality. Then we'll move into the emergency codes that the hospitals use, followed by real-world examples, and finally our conclusion or the takeaway.
So why even have this presentation? Well, inmates are people too. If you take a look at the slide, you'll realize that just because someone is incarcerated does not mean they are exempt from medical issues. You have a pregnant inmate. If a female commits a crime and she's pregnant at that particular time, it is not uncommon for her to deliver the child while being incarcerated. You'll also see another gentleman who is paralyzed and he cannot walk, therefore he's in a wheelchair. Another person is receiving dialysis and possibly getting ready for a CAT scan. You'll also see another person having their ear examined. The reality is, prison is not the cleanest place. So it does make sense that those who reside there may need a lot of medical attention. The first policy that we're going to look at is the police hold policy. For starters, the admission of a detainee gets identified on hospital medical logs. Second, wherever the detainee or prisoner will be admitted, that unit is notified. Third, patients in custody or detained receive medical attention under an alias or a false name for the protection of both the inmate as well as hospital staff and patients. The law enforcement agency responsible for the detainee should have a law enforcement officer in the prisoner's attendance at all times while at the hospital. And last, the Protective Services Department or hospital security will function as a liaison between the hospital and the necessary law enforcement agency. It is important to note that hospital and personnel are not responsible for police security. If a patient attempts to leave their room, there will be no efforts made by hospital staff to restrain or detain that prisoner. Also, the use of handcuffs or any other restrictive device, typically used by law enforcement, that is not to be used or applied by any medical staff, as there is no provision for the use of handcuffs or restraints in the healthcare industry in this particular case. Third, nursing staff must document whenever a patient is admitted in handcuffs or any other restraints by law enforcement.
Discharge of an inmate. First, the law enforcement agency should be notified when a discharge order is written. Next, discharge instructions should be sent to the receiving correctional facility with physician order. Finally, any follow-up appointment time should not be given to the patient, but notification should be given to the law enforcement agency or correctional institute. Forensic staff and care of detainee policy, law enforcement, and protective services. Agencies scheduling detainees for outpatient services are to notify the hospital facility in advance of arrival for the appointment. Notification will include location of the intended service and any relevant information that is necessary to ensure the safety of the detainee and the staff. For a scheduled admission, the admitting department shall notify the Protective Services Department of the detainee's alias, floor, and room number of admission. Any other service area, which is the initial point of contact, must notify the Protective Services Department of a detainee's arrival. The escorting officer and detainee will enter through the hospital emergency entrance. Protective Services must be notified and approve any exceptions to the emergency room. Admitting employees will contact Protective Services upon the arrival of the detainee.
Detainee confidentiality policy. The respective law enforcement agency is to notify patient access prior to the arrival of the detainee. All pertinent information must be provided in a timely manner before the detainee arrives. Pertinent information includes demographic information, diagnosis, the doctor who will attend to that patient, billing information, and any prescription medications that the detainee may be receiving. All patients will receive an alias or a false name for confidentiality and protection of the patient. Upon receipt of the reservation form, the respective law enforcement agency patient access will notify protective services, hospital security, of the impending arrival of the patient. Patient access will request a bed assignment from the bed control department, and before the patient is discharged, the discharging department will be responsible for notifying patient access of the patient's legal identity update so that it's updated correctly into the computer system. Now we will review the care for the detainee.
Access through the ER. In case of emergency, when detainees are presented to any FACE emergency department, accompanied by law enforcement personnel, they will be registered and evaluated expeditiously according to clinical presentation and acuity of illness.
The use of isolation and restraints. Detainees under administrative restraint will be observed by the escorting officer or by medical personnel during any examination or treatment. Next, detainees admitted to the hospital room must be in a private room. If there is a reason that the detainee may escape or is a safety risk to the staff or others, then an officer will be assigned to monitor the patient. If a detainee escapes, nursing personnel will notify Protective Service Department immediately, who will in turn notify the proper legal authorities. The nursing staff will make no attempt.
Disciplinary restrictions. In consultation with legal authorities, restrictions may be established. The law enforcement officer or the security officer will explain these restrictions. Protective Services personnel will comply with those restrictions set forth by legal authorities.
Length of stay. Usually, persons in legal custody will be treated in the emergency department and then discharged with the attending officer. However, if hospitalization is appropriate and necessary, the ER department will request an alias from the patient access department and then a bed assignment from the bed control department. Discharge planning and follow-up care. Discharge planning actually begins at the time of admissions, and it's coordinated with legal authorities. Referrals and follow-up care is given to all persons at the time of discharge.
Now we are going to talk about a few emergency codes. Code blue is cardiac arrest or respiratory arrest. A code black is a bomb threat. A code red means fire. Code assist is a combative person. A code strong is a person with a weapon. Code active shooter is pretty self-explanatory. And code elopement does not mean that a patient has ran off with an inmate. Instead, it means that a vulnerable patient is in fact missing.
Code blue, cardiac, respiratory arrest for an adult patient. Code black, bomb threat. A bomb threat has been received.
Code red is a fire. All staff members, visitors, and patients should be moved to safe areas throughout the facility. This, in addition to the other codes, are extremely important because the last thing we need is an inmate escaping during a chaotic situation in a facility. Code Assist has to deal with a combative person or a combative patient. Visitors, patients, and other non-essential employees should be moved away from the immediate area of concern. Restraining a combative person is the responsibility of the law enforcement agency or protective services. A code strong has to do with a person with a weapon. All non-essential staff must stay away from the affected unit. No unauthorized personnel will be allowed in the particular unit. This goes to show why it is very important that we secure all items, because as you can see here, anything can be turned into a weapon.
Code active shooter. When there is an active shooter, move to a safe area outside of the hospital. If unable to safely exit the facility, turn off the lights, silence all electronics, and barricade yourself as best as possible. So why do we need to know all this? Whenever a detainee or prisoner is brought into the hospital, the threat level immediately increases. Medical staff need to be aware of proper procedures, as these situations tend to escalate quickly and without warning. Are you going to know what to do when a pregnant prisoner is giving up her baby for adoption and you have the adopting family and the infant in the same room, and the pregnant prisoner tends to get agitated, irritated, overwhelmed, and lashes out? What about when you have gang members on the same floor? Are you going to know how to handle that situation? Or even an inmate getting a hold of a weapon and barricading himself inside the room? These are the things you need to think about.
So what are the takeaways from today's presentation? First and foremost, we want to ensure that you are aware of the policies. Safety only works when everyone is aware and everyone is following the policy. We want you to be aware of your surroundings. We want to ensure that you clean up after yourselves. Pick up all bandages, all needles, all objects, because everything and anything can be turned into a weapon. And last, if you see anything that concerns you or you do not understand the policy, please speak up.
This concludes our presentation. On behalf of everyone at Viviane Hospital, we hope you found our webinar to be enjoyable and informative. Thank you.